In a city that never slows down, where stories of struggle are often overlooked, one man's quiet existence was about to change forever. James Carter, a forgotten war veteran, had long accepted life's hardships until an unexpected conversation on a park bench set off a chain of events that would rewrite his fate. What he didn't know was that the stranger beside him wasn't just another passerby, but someone who carried a heart far greater than his fame. Los Angeles was always in a hurry. People rushed past each other with headphones in, lost in their own worlds, barely acknowledging the existence of those around them. But James Carter, a 78-year-old war veteran, was no longer part of that rush. He had long since learned that life doesn't wait for anyone. The world had moved on, but James felt like he had been left behind. He sat on his usual park bench, dressed in an old army jacket that had seen better days, a cane resting against his leg. He watched the pigeons flutter around, the occasional jogger pass by, and the young couples wrapped up in their own love stories. It was another ordinary afternoon, until a man sat down next to him. James barely glanced at him. He looked like any other stranger, dressed in black jeans and a simple jacket, wearing sunglasses. Something about him seemed familiar, but James couldn't place it. "Mind if I sit here?" the man asked politely. James shrugged. "It's a free country." The man chuckled. "That it is." For a while, they sat in silence, watching the world move. Then, the man glanced at James' jacket. "You served?" he asked. James nodded. "A long time ago." "Which war?" James sighed. "Vietnam." The man's expression softened. "That must have been tough." James gave him a sideways glance. "You have no idea, kid." The stranger smiled. "You'd be surprised." James found himself talking. Not much at first, but little pieces of his past slipped out. He spoke about the war, the friends he had lost, and how different the world felt now. He didn't know why he was opening up. Perhaps it was because the man actually listened. After a long pause, James asked, "What about you? What do you do?" The man hesitated for a moment, then said, "I'm in the film industry." James scoffed. "Hollywood? Who? Can't say I keep up with all that nonsense." The man laughed. "That's fair." As the sun dipped lower, the man stood up. "It was nice talking to you, James. Take care of yourself, all right?" James watched him walk away, blending into the crowd, thinking nothing more of it. A night of reflection. That night, James returned to his tiny apartment, a dimly lit one-bedroom with walls covered in old photographs and warm medals that no one cared about anymore. He heated up a can of soup, his usual dinner, and sat at the small wooden table. He couldn't stop thinking about the conversation in the park. Something about that man had felt different. He had met plenty of people over the years who asked about his service, but most only did it out of politeness. This guy? He actually listened. James shook his head and took a sip of his soup. Why did it even matter? He was just another stranger who'd come and gone, like everyone else in James' life. A revelation at the diner. The next evening, James went to the small diner he had been visiting for years. It wasn't fancy, but the people there knew him, and that was enough. Sarah, the waitress, greeted him with a warm smile. "The usual, James." He nodded, pulling out his worn wallet to check if he had enough money. His pension was barely enough to cover his needs, and he had skipped lunch that day just to afford dinner. As he sipped his coffee, he overheard a conversation at the next table. "Man, did you see that new Keanu Reeves movie? That guy is a legend." James frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar. "Yeah, and is such a good guy in real life. Always helping people, super down to earth." James glanced up. Keanu Reeves. His mind raced back to the man in the park. Could it be? His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his old flip phone and typed the name into Google. When the images loaded, his heart nearly stopped. It was him. The man in the park was Keanu Reeves. James sat there, stunned. He had been talking to one of the most famous actors in the world and had no idea. He had even called Hollywood nonsense right to his face. Before he could process it, Sarah walked over, holding an envelope. "James, someone left this for you earlier today." Confused, James took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a handwritten note and a key. James was woken up by the sound of footsteps approaching. He sat up, rubbing his tired eyes. A young man in a suit stood before him, holding a folder. "Mr. Carter?" the man asked. James frowned. "Who's asking?" The young man smiled. "I work for a private donor. He asked me to find you. He wanted to make sure you're taken care of." James blinked in confusion. "What?" The man handed him a key and a piece of paper. James unfolded it slowly, his hands shaking. It was an apartment lease. In his name. Fully paid for. James' breath hitched. This isn't real." The man chuckled. "Oh, it's very real, sir. You'll also find that your medical expenses have been taken care of. And there's a bank account set up for you, enough to help you get back on your feet." Tears welled up in James' eyes as he stared at the papers in disbelief. "But who? Why?" The young man smiled knowingly. "He wanted to stay anonymous. But he did leave you a note." James unfolded a small piece of paper, his hands trembling. The message was simple yet powerful. "No hero should ever be forgotten. Thank you for your service. K.R." James clutched the note to his chest, tears streaming down his face. Moral of the story. Sometimes, life is a way of reminding us that kindness knows no boundaries. James Carter had spent years believing he was invisible, but one man saw him, truly saw him. And in the end, it wasn't about wealth or fame, but about one simple truth. No hero should ever be forgotten. Because sometimes, all it takes to change a life is one act of kindness. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Let's spread kindness, one story at a time.